Here's a simple automata I'm going to show you how to make. I've tried to use as many household materials as possible so that almost anybody could make this out of their house. Included in it are coffee stirrers, big fat straws, tape, some tacky glue, and a couple staples. So tools we'll need are things like an awl. There's two different kinds here, and then you can even make something like this. We're going to need a pencil. We're going to need a knife, box cutter for cutting the cardboard. I like to use this type of stapler. It's called a P22 stapler by Arrow. Scissors, could be various scissors like that, and then also maybe some other tape, and of course cardboard. This is a crankshaft driven automata. The crankshaft itself is comprised of two sides of the yoke with a bearing in the bottom made from a straw, and through that goes a coffee stirrer. So we have a coffee stirrer that comes in from the side here and comes out to the handle, and then a piece of cardboard and another coffee stirrer. So what I wanted to show you first is the relationship between cardboard, the edge of the cardboard, and a coffee stirrer. So you notice that coffee stirrer just fits inside of the corrugation of the cardboard. As I put it in there, I'm going to kind of give it a little wiggle test. So based on the depth, it becomes less wiggly. So that's a pretty non-wiggly depth right there. I'm going to put my thumbnail on it, pull it out, and see that it's about an inch that it needs to be in to be really stable inside the corrugation. That's important because with our machine, this part of the crankshaft needs to be fairly rigid, as well as the top part. Because if you can see, there's a line that goes straight through and out the other side, kind of like an axle, but then it's offset. So these connections need to be relatively stiff so that you don't get a lot of bowing and flexing in the bottom of your machine. So to start, I'm going to take a straight edge, and it can be any kind of straight edge, and I'm going to cut a 1-inch piece with corrugation going this way. So I'm going to lay it out here. As with all cardboard, we could measure it, I guess, but I'm not going to. With all cardboard, you don't want to try to do it in one go. We're going to do it in multiple passes. So we have a nice clean cut that way. So now we need to figure out how long the lobes of our crankshaft are going to be, or the arms. I'm just going to make a mark there, and we'll call that our distance. Straight edge again. And all things need to be equal. So I'm going to fold that over, make a mark on this side, and then cut through at this point too. So, once again, putting the cardboard coffee stirrer into the cardboard corrugation, we're going to see it goes in the full inch, but we're going to glue that in place. I'm going to take some tacky glue and try to get as much on the inside of that corrugation as possible. and get that like that. So that's one side of our crankshaft. Which side it is, up to you. We're going to do the center part though now in this corrugation here. Let's try just squirting a little glue inside the corrugation. And we'll shove that glue down through the hole. And you can see it just barely coming out the other side. So now we have half of our system. Next is going to go a bearing in the center. This will allow our arm here to pivot on the centerpiece. I can make that almost any width I want, but consider that the wider this whole assembly goes, the bigger the automata needs to be. So I'm going to call it about there. Slide that on. And then my other piece of cardboard is going to go on the other side of this. I do want to make sure I cut this off cleanly, so I'm going to make a mark here. You could use the box cutter to cut that. You could work on it like this. You could rock back and forth on it. But I like to use a pair of diagonal cutters, which make the job very easy. You can also taper the ends to make it go into the corrugation that much easier. All right, now we're going to squirt some glue in here again. Slide that on, and you want to leave a gap so there's some play in that part. Now, before we attach the other side of our crankshaft, we have to consider how we're going to get it inside of our machine. So we're going to wait to put the other side on, and we're going to trim this off. This could be our crank side here, but we're going to trim it off so that it's just not so long and cumbersome. Kind of like that. All right. Let me try and illustrate what I'm talking about when I mean the distance from the crankshaft to the pivot point. So let's say we have two crankshafts, and I'm going to represent them by the circular path of the crankshaft itself and the different positions, top, bottom, and as it's turning around. So if we have a point low where our crankshaft can only fit through there, we're going to trace this kind of line. So it's going to go here, here, there, and then up there. So as it's turning around, our full rotation will be mirrored up there. Now if I were to put that position not here but further up, we're going to end up with something like this. The bottom of it, it'll go straight on through. For the side over here, like that. From here to there, like that. The top of our position and bottom of our position. Interesting thing to note is this is further away this pivot point is, the more ovoid our shape. If it's 1-to-1, it's going to be equal, but as you stretch it out, you start to get more oval shape. Same thing if you make this really squat, you're going to get an oval going in this axis. So you can see up here that our distance here to here is smaller than here to here. So that means that there's less waggle here and more waggle here. The lower this is, closer to the crank, further away, more subtle movement. So we're going to make some seat of the pants decisions about the height of our box. So meaning how high, how tall is our box going to be? So I'd like to make it taller than that previous one, so I'm just going to use that as a reference for my height. And then as far as width, let's just go with this random block of wood that I have here. I'll make a mark, a couple marks. We're going to cut. When I'm using an X-Acto knife, I like to place my first point where I'm going to cut on my line, poke it in, then I move my straight edge to it. That way I have at least one side locked in. Once again, long, smooth strokes that don't go all the way through on the first try. Okay. So now we need to decide on the height of our whole machine. I'm going to give a nice clean edge on this piece of cardboard. And we said we were going to go with something about this high. So I'm going to want to leave some tabs, top and bottom, to be able to fold around like this here, so I have something to attach to. So let's just go in the width of this stick I have here. And I'm going to score across just through one layer of my cardboard for the top. Decide maybe my whole distance here is going to be this tall. Make a mark there. Go straight across on that with a score. That leaves like that. So now I need to use my crankshaft that I was making before to be able to determine the inside width of my box. So I'm going to want to leave enough room on the side for a little bit of bearing on both sides. So I think about there would be a pretty good spot. So I'm going to also make a mark or make a score across here. So I've got something kind of looks like that. That is half of my box. I'm going to repeat that. I make a hole straight on through. That way I know where to cut and I know where to score. This one gets cut away. This one gets scored. This one gets scored. And this one gets scored. All right. So we have this kind of arrangement now for our box. Nice and tall looking box. Now I can eliminate some of these sides if I want. That just gives me more to attach to. Here's where this P22 stapler comes in pretty handy. Because it's got a long depth on it, I can place it inside here and put a staple through some cardboard pretty easily. That side and this side here. Now if I wanted to have a flat bottom here, I could eliminate this one and I still have that piece there. Maybe we'll do that. So cut this off. And So that's a fairly good box. If I want to make some corner stabilizers for that, I could do that really quickly with a triangular piece of material. I can do this one of two ways. I can start by cutting a little square first. So I've got the square here, and think of it as I want a piece for my corner. Let's just say this is my corner, and I want to score along that line. And then on this side, I'm going to cut all the way through, cut all the way through, and that gives me a piece that can fit inside the corner. That'll make things a little stiffer also. So I can put that in right there at the bottom edge. And I can reach all the way through. Staple that in position there. And staple it here. I could also be gluing these intersections and taping them. You don't have to use a stapler. I just like the stapler because it's so fast. I can even reach on the inside of here and here. So even just having that one on there makes my box that much stiffer. All right, so now we need to get our crankshaft inside of our box. And we have to decide about where we want it on our machine. So, of course, it's going to be in the center, but how far up? Well, obviously, if our crankshaft is rotating on the inside there, we need enough clearance at the bottom. So, I think about here would be a good spot. I'm going to use one of my smaller awls. I'm going to poke a hole straight on through. I want to make sure that's the same as the other side, so I can use anything to measure. I don't have to use a ruler. Just use my thumbnail to hold down there. Come around to this other side here, and that's where I want to make my hole to be straight across. Now, of course, that hole is not big enough to accommodate the stick or the straw, so I need to make that open up that hole in scale. So, just so happens that a pencil will give you a hole that will be about the right size to be able to slide in our straw. And I'm backing it up with my fingers here on either side of this. See, I'm not on either side of it. And once that goes through, and leave a little burr on there, that's going to hold our bearings nicely on either side. I'm going to do that on both sides. And then also at the top of my machine, I'm going to make a slit. So this slit's going to allow this coffee stirrer to go up and down, but to also not bind up in there. And I could do I could do this either as a slit or as a hole. It'll probably work just fine as a hole. Let me just make sure it's opened up a little bit side to side like that. That way this will fit through there. All right, so we're already starting to see some progress. I'm going to stick this through here just as a temporary measure, just to show you before we put the bearings in. But you can see that it can turn in there, but it's got a lot of friction because it's a square peg in a round hole. So we want to get our bearings, so to speak, and we're going to put them in there. So I'm going to cut a little piece of straw, only about 1/2 inch in diameter, and stick it in the hole. We can glue that in there too. Not absolutely necessary, but if you want to have this as an object for a while, maybe a little glue around the perimeter of that wouldn't be such a bad idea. Pop that one in there also. That one got a little dinged. Don't like you either. holes big enough. Make sure I got some glue on there. Tacky glue is tacky. All right. So now we have our bearings inserted on both sides of that. I'm going to take my crankshaft and I'm going to insert it from the inside through there. There we go. And then we'll be able to see right away when we line up this into our corrugation that we now have the beginning of a functioning crankshaft. All right, we want to glue this into place. I guess I should have put my glue in there before I shoved it in there. That's okay. Squirt my glue into corrugation. Pop that back in there. And slide this coffee stirrer until it almost comes out of the other side of that. Now when that dries up, it's going to be a fairly rigid connection. I'm going to also trim off enough over here on this side to be able to accommodate the other side of my crank arm. So I only need that right there. So let me show you really quickly before we even install the handle our action that we're going to get from this particular distance on our piece. A piece of tape, put it on one side of our crankshaft or our connecting rod, lay it down here so my tape wraps around the bottom of my bearing, flip it over here, and then comes back around and connects to the connecting rod. Like that. All right, so we can see the action on this thing. From the side, we have it going up and down about that much. From this side, you can see it like that. So now we need to get a little piece on here for our crank handle. And I remember that our crank handle doesn't need to be super long, but it is important that it opposes the direction of the crank itself on the inside, the arm on the inside. So I'm going to squirt some glue down the corrugation and slide that on. And leave a little bit of gap between my bearing and the inside. And then I'm going to cut off a piece that's going to be my handle. And this is going to go on the inside here. Flip this over, squirt some glue in. And insert that in there. Now, because I'm so close to the edge, I'm worried I'm going to break through the bottom of my my corrugation there. So stapler can also be used if you want to make sure you're going to hold your connections in place. I'm not going to staple through the coffee stirrer, but just on the other side of it, like that. And the same thing on the top, and then right below it. That's just going to give me a little extra stiffness on there in a critical part where we get a lot of torque. So here we go. So that's the basic movement and the basic mechanism. From there, you can decorate it with all kinds of things on the top. And depending on what you want, it could be a character jumping up and down, could be somebody doing a pogo, Could be even going in this orientation here, like could be the tail of a fish swimming away. But I like to approach this as a mechanism first and then let the kids decide what it's going to be afterwards. Simple crankshaft mechanism. Bye-bye.